The morning sun cast long shadows across the pristine gardens of Clarence's house as Charlotte walked briskly along the cobblestone path. Her heels clicked rhythmically against the stones, each step echoing her determination to reach the private meeting she had been summoned to attend. The young woman had always carried herself with grace, but today there was something different in her stride, a quiet confidence that came from years of learning to navigate the complex world she had married into. Charlotte adjusted the pearl necklace at her throat, a gift from her late mother-in-law that had become her signature piece. The morning air was crisp, and she pulled her navy blazer closer to her body as she approached the ornate entrance where two guards stood at attention. Their red uniforms were immaculate, their expressions unreadable behind their ceremonial helmets. Inside the grand hallway, the atmosphere felt heavy with unspoken tension. Charlotte had received the formal invitation only the evening before, a request for a private audience that could not be declined. She understood the weight of such summons in their world, where every interaction carried layers of protocol and hidden meaning. Camilla stood near the tall windows of the morning room, her silhouette framed against the light streaming through the glass. She wore a cream-colored dress suit that emphasized her position and authority. Her silver hair was perfectly styled, not a strand out of place, and her jewelry caught the light as she turned to acknowledge Charlotte's arrival. The room itself spoke of centuries of tradition. Oil paintings of long-dead royals gazed down from golden frames, while antique furniture arranged with military precision created an atmosphere of formal grandeur. Fresh flowers in crystal vases added splashes of color, but even they seemed to stand at attention in this space where power and protocol ruled supreme. Charlotte entered with the practiced curtsy that had become second nature to her. She had learned years ago that in this world, every gesture mattered. Every movement was observed and interpreted. The two women regarded each other across the ornate carpet that bore the family crest, their relationship complicated by years of careful diplomacy and underlying tensions. The silence stretched between them as Camilla moved away from the window, her gaze fixed on the younger woman with an intensity that made Charlotte's pulse quicken. There had always been an unspoken competition between them, a delicate dance of influence and position that both women understood but never acknowledged openly. Charlotte remained standing near the doorway, waiting for permission to sit or move further into the room. The protocols of their interactions had been established long ago, invisible lines drawn that both women knew better than to cross without invitation. The morning light continued to stream through the windows, but the warmth it promised seemed to stop short of reaching either woman. Camilla finally spoke, her voice carrying the authority that came with decades of navigating royal circles. She had learned to use silence as a weapon, to let tension build until others felt compelled to fill the void with words that might reveal more than they intended. Today, however, she had specific business to address, matters that could not be left to chance or misinterpretation. The conversation that followed would be remembered by both women for years to come, though neither could have predicted how dramatically their carefully maintained relationship was about to change. Charlotte listened as Camilla outlined concerns that had been growing in recent months, whispers and observations that had reached the highest levels of their carefully structured world. As the discussion continued, Charlotte felt the familiar weight of expectations and judgment that seemed to follow her everywhere in this golden cage she had chosen to enter. She had always known that her every action would be scrutinized, that her words would be analyzed for hidden meanings, that her loyalty would be constantly tested in ways both subtle and direct. The tension in the room grew thicker as Camilla's tone became more pointed, her words carrying implications that Charlotte was only beginning to understand. The morning that had started with such promise was taking a turn that neither woman had fully anticipated, setting the stage for a confrontation that would test everything Charlotte thought she knew about her place in this ancient and unforgiving institution. That Camilla's accusations came like carefully aimed arrows, each one designed to pierce through Charlotte's composure. She spoke of leaked information appearing in tabloid newspapers, of private family conversations somehow finding their way into public discourse, of a pattern that suggested someone with intimate access was sharing details that should have remained sacred and secret. Charlotte felt her heart racing as she listened to the litany of concerns. Each allegation felt like a physical blow, not because she was guilty of the accusations, but because she understood the implications of being suspected. In their world, suspicion alone could be enough to destroy a reputation that had taken years to build. The evidence Camilla presented was circumstantial but damning in its accumulation. Stories had appeared in the press following family gatherings that Charlotte had attended. Details about private conversations had been reported with an accuracy that suggested inside knowledge. The timing of various leaks seemed to correlate with Charlotte's presence at sensitive meetings and discussions. Charlotte attempted to defend herself, her voice remaining steady despite the turmoil she felt inside. She explained that she had always been careful with information, that she understood the sacred trust that came with her position, that she would never betray the family that had welcomed her into their ranks. Her words sounded hollow even to her own ears, overwhelmed by the weight of evidence being presented against her. Camilla listened to these protestations with the skeptical expression of someone who had heard similar denials before. She had been in this world long enough to know how easily trust could be broken, how devastating the consequences could be when private matters became public entertainment. The media's appetite for royal secrets was insatiable, and someone was clearly feeding that hunger. As the conversation continued, Charlotte began to realize that this was not merely an informal discussion of concerns. This was a formal accusation, a trial of sorts where she was being presented with evidence of her alleged betrayals. The careful politeness of their interaction could not mask the serious nature of what was happening. Camilla produced copies of newspaper clippings, each one highlighting stories that had damaged the family's reputation or revealed information that should have been kept private. She traced connections between Charlotte's presence at events and the subsequent appearance of detailed reports in the media. The pattern was undeniable, even if Charlotte's guilt was not definitively proven. The younger woman felt trapped by the logic of the accusations. She could not prove a negative, could not definitively demonstrate that she had not been the source of the leaks. Her denials seemed weak against the mounting circumstantial evidence, and she began to understand how powerless she truly was in this situation. Charlotte's mind raced as she tried to think of alternative explanations for the pattern Camilla had identified. She suggested that others had been present at these same events, that staff members or security personnel might have access to the same information. But, even as she spoke these words, she could see that Camilla was not convinced by her attempts to deflect suspicion. The accusations continued to pile up like stones in a wall that seemed designed to crush Charlotte's spirit. Camilla spoke of the family's disappointment, of the damage that had been done to relationships that had taken generations to build, of the trust that had been broken by someone's selfish desire for attention or financial gain. Charlotte found herself wondering if this confrontation was the result of genuine evidence or if she was being made a scapegoat for leaks that had multiple possible sources. The paranoia that seemed to infect their world made everyone suspect, and perhaps she was simply the most convenient target for frustrations that had been building for months. The morning light that had seemed so promising earlier now felt harsh and unforgiving as it illuminated the growing chasm between the two women. Charlotte realized that regardless of her actual guilt or innocence, she was being positioned as the primary suspect in a series of betrayals that had shaken the foundation of trust within their carefully constructed world. As Camilla's presentation of evidence reached its climax, Charlotte understood that she was facing a moment that would define her future relationship with the family she had worked so hard to serve. The accusations hung in the air between them like an unbreakable barrier, transforming what had once been a relationship of mutual respect into something far more dangerous and unpredictable. The moment arrived with the suddenness of a thunderclap. Camilla's voice cut through the morning air like a blade, sharp and unyielding in its authority. The accusations had been building toward this climax, this ultimate test of power and submission that would determine Charlotte's place in their hierarchy. Charlotte felt the words hit her like physical blows. The demand was not just unexpected, it was unprecedented in their modern interactions. Such displays of dominance belonged to centuries past, to times when royal protocol included gestures of submission that contemporary society had long abandoned. Yet here, in this ornate room with its watching portraits and silent witnesses, the past was being resurrected with brutal efficiency. The younger woman's composure, which had held steady through the accusations and evidence, finally began to crack under the weight of this ultimate humiliation. Her hands trembled slightly as she processed what was being demanded of her. This was not merely about apologizing for alleged betrayals or promising better behavior in the future. This was about power, pure and simple, and about establishing once and for all where true authority resided. Charlotte's mind raced through her options, each one seeming more impossible than the last. To comply would mean accepting guilt for crimes she insisted she had not committed. It would mean acknowledging a hierarchy that reduced her to little more than a subject begging for mercy. To refuse would mean open rebellion against forces that held the power to destroy everything she had built in this world. The silence in the room grew oppressive as Camilla waited for compliance. Her expression remained controlled, but Charlotte could see the steel beneath the surface, the determination of someone who had fought their own battles for respect and position and now wielded the authority that came with victory. This was not a request that could be negotiated or modified. It was a command that brooked no opposition. Charlotte thought of her children, of the life she had built within these golden walls, of the responsibilities and privileges that came with her position. She considered the cost of resistance against the price of submission, weighing her dignity against her family's future. The calculation was brutal in its simplicity, and she understood that whatever choice she made would echo through the years to come. The physical act demanded of her seemed symbolic of so much more than the immediate situation. It represented centuries of tradition, of power structures that had survived revolutions and reforms, of an institution that bent individuals to its will rather than adapting to accommodate their needs. Charlotte realized she was facing not just Camilla's authority, but the weight of history itself. As she stood there, frozen between defiance and submission, Charlotte became acutely aware of every sound in the room. The ticking of an antique clock, the distant murmur of staff going about their duties, the whisper of fabric as Camilla shifted position. Time seemed suspended, waiting for her decision to break the spell and determine the future of their relationship. Charlotte's breathing became shallow as she contemplated the magnitude of what was being asked of her. This was about more than protocol or punishment. It was about breaking her spirit, about ensuring that she understood her place in a hierarchy that valued obedience above all other virtues. The demand carried implications that extended far beyond this single moment of humiliation. The weight of expectation pressed down on Charlotte like a physical force. She could feel Camilla's gaze burning into her, measuring her resistance, calculating the precise moment when pride would finally give way to pragmatic submission. This was psychological warfare conducted in the most civilized of settings, with weapons forged from tradition and protocol rather than steel and gunpowder. Charlotte's thoughts turned to the women who had come before her in this role, wondering how they had navigated similar moments of crisis and challenge. Had they faced such direct tests of their submission, or had the demands been more subtle, more gradually imposed until resistance seemed impossible? She felt the loneliness of her position acutely, understanding that there were no allies in this room, no one who would speak in her defense. The afternoon light had shifted, casting different shadows across the ornate carpet where Charlotte stood. The change seemed to mock the illusion of time's passage, highlighting how long she had been standing there, paralyzed by an impossible choice. Camilla's patience appeared infinite, as if she were prepared to wait hours for the submission she demanded. Charlotte realized that this moment had been building for years, that every small conflict and tension had been leading to this ultimate test of wills. The accusations of betrayal had merely been the justification for what Camilla had always intended, the complete subordination of someone she saw as a threat to her own position and authority. To Charlotte's knees had begun to bend, her resolve finally cracking under the immense pressure when the door to the morning room opened with a soft but deliberate sound. The interruption came at the precise moment when submission seemed inevitable, when dignity was about to be sacrificed on the altar of institutional authority. A figure in the distinctive red uniform of the Royal Guard stepped into the room with measured precision. His presence immediately altered the atmosphere, bringing with it the weight of duty and protocol that superseded even the power dynamics playing out between the two women. The guard's expression remained neutral, professional, but his timing suggested an awareness of the situation that went beyond mere coincidence. The guard cleared his throat respectfully before speaking, his voice carrying the authority that came from years of faithful service to the institution they all served. His words were few, but their impact was immediate and devastating to Camilla's carefully orchestrated display of dominance. He reminded everyone present of protocols and procedures that even she could not override, regardless of her position or intentions. Charlotte remained frozen in her partially bent position, afraid to move as the implications of the guard's words settled over the room like a protective shield. She had been saved not by her own strength or defiance, but by the very system that had seemed moments before to be crushing her spirit. The irony was not lost on her. Salvation had come from the most unexpected source. Camilla's expression shifted almost imperceptibly, but Charlotte caught the flash of anger and frustration that crossed her features before being quickly suppressed. The older woman had been outmaneuvered by someone she had never considered a threat, someone whose duty to the institution itself superseded loyalty to any individual member of the family. The guard continued speaking in measured tones, outlining regulations that protected all family members from certain forms of treatment, regardless of circumstances or accusations. His words carried the weight of centuries of accumulated wisdom about the dangers of unchecked power, even within their own ranks. The institution had learned, sometimes painfully, that its survival depended on protecting individuals from each other's excesses. Charlotte slowly straightened, her movements careful and deliberate as she processed this unexpected turn of events. The humiliation she had been about to endure was forbidden not by her own resistance, but by rules and protocols that existed precisely to prevent such abuses of power. She felt a mixture of relief and embarrassment at her near capitulation. The guard's presence served as a stark reminder that their world operated according to rules that existed beyond personal vendettas or power struggles. Even Camilla, with all her authority and influence, was bound by constraints that had been established to protect the institution from the destructive potential of unchecked personal animosity. Camilla attempted to dismiss the guard's concerns, suggesting that their private discussion did not fall under the purview of such regulations. Her voice carried less conviction than before, however, as she realized that her carefully planned demonstration of dominance had been undermined by forces she had not anticipated or prepared for. The guard respectfully but firmly disagreed with Camilla's interpretation of the situation. His knowledge of protocol and regulation appeared to be comprehensive, drawn from years of observing and protecting the family members under his care. He spoke with the confidence of someone who understood that his duty transcended personal loyalties or political considerations. Charlotte watched this exchange with growing amazement as she realized that the guard was effectively challenging one of the most powerful women in their world. His courage seemed to stem not from personal bravery, but from an absolute commitment to the principles and procedures that governed their lives. He was protecting not just her, but the integrity of the system itself. The tension in the room shifted dramatically as Camilla found herself forced to retreat from her position. The submission she had demanded was now impossible to obtain, rendered illegitimate by the very rules that governed their existence. Her authority, which had seemed absolute moments before, revealed itself to be constrained by forces beyond her control. The guard's intervention demonstrated that even in their rarefied world, there were checks and balances designed to prevent the abuse of power. Charlotte began to understand that her salvation had come not from external forces, but from the wisdom embedded in their own institutional structures, safeguards that protected individuals from the destructive potential of unchecked authority. As the immediate crisis passed, Charlotte realized that the guard had given her something far more valuable than protection from a single moment of humiliation. He had reminded her that she was not as powerless as she had believed, that there were forces within their world that existed to protect and preserve rather than destroy and diminish. The guard's departure left behind a silence that felt entirely different from the oppressive tension that had dominated the room earlier. Charlotte and Camilla faced each other across a landscape that had been fundamentally altered by the intervention, their relationship forever changed by what had transpired and what had been prevented. Charlotte found her voice first, her words carefully chosen to acknowledge the gravity of the accusations while maintaining her dignity. She spoke of her commitment to the family and institution, her willingness to address any legitimate concerns about her conduct, but also her right to be treated with the respect due to her position. The near humiliation had paradoxically strengthened her resolve rather than broken it. Camilla's response was measured and controlled, but Charlotte could sense the frustration beneath the surface. The older woman had been forced to accept that her authority, while extensive, was not absolute. The intervention had reminded both women that they operated within a system of checks and balances designed to protect the institution from the destructive potential of personal conflicts. The conversation that followed was more productive than either woman might have expected. Without the threat of humiliation hanging over their interaction, they were able to discuss the practical concerns that had sparked the confrontation. Charlotte proposed specific measures to address security concerns, while Camilla agreed to more transparent communication about expectations and concerns. Charlotte realized that the guard's intervention had done more than save her from immediate humiliation. It had reset the power dynamic between herself and Camilla in a way that neither could ignore. The older woman's authority remained intact, but it was now clearly bounded by institutional constraints that protected everyone within their world. In the days that followed, Charlotte found herself reflecting on the lesson she had learned about the nature of power within their institution. True authority came not from the ability to humiliate or dominate others, but from understanding and working within the systems that had been designed to protect and preserve their way of life. The investigation into the information leaks continued, but with a more systematic and fair approach that considered all possible sources rather than focusing solely on Charlotte. The guard's intervention had apparently prompted a review of how such investigations were conducted, ensuring that accusations were based on solid evidence rather than circumstantial speculation. Charlotte's relationship with other family members improved as word spread about how she had handled the crisis. Her refusal to be completely broken by the pressure, combined with her willingness to work constructively toward solutions, earned her a new level of respect from those who had previously questioned her strength and commitment. The guard who had intervened became something of a legend among the staff, though his identity was never publicly revealed. His courage in challenging authority to uphold principles had demonstrated that the institution's values were more important than individual preferences or power struggles. Charlotte made sure her gratitude was conveyed through appropriate channels. Camilla gradually adjusted to the new reality of her relationship with Charlotte. While their interactions remained formal and sometimes tense, they developed a working relationship based on mutual respect rather than attempted dominance. The older woman seemed to understand that the institutional constraints that had protected Charlotte also ultimately protected her own position and authority. The incident prompted quiet reforms in how internal conflicts were handled within the family. New protocols were established to ensure that accusations were investigated fairly and that no family member could be subjected to treatment that violated their dignity or position. The guard's intervention had highlighted gaps in protection that needed to be addressed. Charlotte's children, who had been largely unaware of the crisis their mother was facing, benefited from the improved stability that followed the resolution. The family dynamics became more predictable and less fraught with the kind of tension that had threatened to tear relationships apart from within. The media never learned the details of what had transpired in that morning room, but astute observers noted a change in the family's public interactions. There was a new professionalism and mutual respect that suggested internal conflicts had been resolved in favor of institutional stability over personal power struggles. Years later, Charlotte would look back on that morning as a turning point not just in her relationship with Camilla, but in her understanding of her own place within the institution she had chosen to serve. She had learned that dignity could not be taken from her without her permission, and that even the most powerful individuals were subject to constraints designed to protect the greater good. The guard's simple intervention had demonstrated that sometimes salvation comes from the most unexpected sources, and that institutions survive not because they allow unchecked power, but because they find ways to protect individuals from each other's worst impulses. Charlotte carried this lesson with her through all the challenges that followed, secure in the knowledge that she was protected not just by rules and protocols, but by people who understood that their highest duty was to the principles that made their world possible.